Snow White is the princess of the Kingdom of Tabor, the daughter of King Magnus and Queen Eleanor. After her mother's death, King Magnus marries the enchanting Ravenna, whom he rescued from the Dark Army, an invading force of soldiers made of glass. What the king didn't know was that the invaders were Ravenna's own forces. She had disguised herself to infiltrate the kingdom. Ravenna is actually a powerful sorceress and the leader of the Dark Army. She ends up killing King Magnus on their wedding night after realizing that men like him exploit women's beauty and then abandon them. Hey, this Snow White movie isn't that same old children's movie that even kids today can't sit through. This one has action, adventure, romance, sorcery, and much more. So subscribe to the channel to find out how the story of Snow White and the Huntsman unfolds. While Ravenna takes control of the kingdom, Duke Hammond manages to escape the castle with his son William, but he can't save Snow White, who is captured by Ravenna's brother, Finn. Snow White is then imprisoned in the lonely north tower of the castle. Tabor falls into ruins under Ravenna's rule. What was once green turns into darkness and shadow. The ones who suffer the most are beautiful women, because Ravenna periodically drains the youth of young women to maintain a spell cast by her mother, ensuring her eternal beauty. Nature collapses, and people turn against one another. When Snow White reaches adulthood, Ravenna discovers through her magic mirror that Snow White is the only one who can destroy her, unless Ravenna consumes the young girl's heart, which will make her immortal. Ravenna orders Finn to capture Snow White, but Finn, wanting to take advantage of Snow White, you know what I mean, lets his guard down, and Snow White gives him a solid slap in the face. With that, Snow White manages to escape the castle and ends up in the dark forest where Ravenna has no power. Eric, known as the Huntsman, a widowed alcoholic who survived the dark forest, is brought to Ravenna, who orders him to take Finn to chase after Snow White. In return, Ravenna promises to resurrect Eric's deceased wife, Sarah. The cunning huntsman finds Snow White in the dark forest, but Finn reveals that Ravenna doesn't have the power to bring the dead back to life. The huntsman then beats up the soldiers and decides to help Snow White escape. In exchange for a reward in gold, he agrees to take her to Duke Hammond's castle. Meanwhile, Hammond discovers that Snow White is alive and has escaped into the dark forest. His son William, who was Snow White's childhood friend, infiltrates Finn's group as an archer to find her. Snow White and Eric leave the dark forest and cross a bridge where a monstrous troll resides. During the fight that follows, Eric is incapacitated, but Snow White manages to calm the troll before it attacks her. They discover a fishing village where all the women have disfigured their faces to escape Ravenna. The people in this village are smart. Better to be ugly and alive than beautiful and dead. While Eric is recovering and being cared for, the women reveal Snow White's true identity to him. Until then, he had thought Snow White was just someone Ravenna had an interest in. But he learns she is the rightful queen. The village women welcome Snow White, but Eric decides to leave her in their care, believing she will be safer without him. After all, everyone he has ever loved has died, and by this point, the huntsman has started to feel an attraction toward Snow White. However, he returns when he sees the village being attacked and set on fire by Finn's men. Snow White and the huntsman narrowly escape, along with some of the village women. Eventually, they fall into a trap and encounter a group of dwarves named Muir, Beith, Gort, Cole, Dwyer, Quirt, Neon, and Gus. Muir discovers Snow White's true identity as the only person capable of defeating Ravenna and ending her reign. As they travel through a fairy sanctuary, it becomes increasingly clear how important Snow White is in the grand scheme of things. When she follows some fairies through the forest, she encounters a majestic white stag, which blesses her, according to Muir. He says that she is life itself and will bring healing to the kingdom. Suddenly, an arrow strikes the stag, and the group is attacked by Finn's men, resulting in Gus's death as he shields Snow White from an arrow. The huntsman kills Finn after discovering that he was involved in the murder of his wife Sarah. This negatively affects Ravenna, as she grows weaker due to Snow White's survival. Ravenna is unable to keep her brother alive. William reveals himself and helps defeat the soldiers before joining the others on their journey to Hammond's castle. The group stops in a snow-covered forest to rest and recover. Ravenna disguises herself as William and lures Snow White away from the others. In disguise, Ravenna tries to persuade her to eat a poisoned apple, and we all know this story. Snow White eats the apple and falls unconscious. Ravenna is forced to flee in a cloud of ravens when the huntsman and William appear. The ravens return to Tabor through a hole in the roof and fall dead to the floor, while Ravenna emerges from a dark substance, becoming weaker. William, unaware, kisses the unconscious Snow White, and a single tear falls. She is taken to the Great Hall in Hammond's castle. There, the huntsman expresses his love and regret for not having saved Snow White, who reminds him of his late wife. He kisses her, breaking the spell, and she awakens after a second tear falls. Snow White returns different, now with fire in her eyes. She delivers an inspiring speech in the hall and takes command of the Duke's army, leading them into battle against Ravenna. We see Ravenna healthy and young again, surrounded by a crowd of women drained of their youth. As the army approaches the castle, the defenders launch fireballs, while the dwarves infiltrate Tabor through the sewers and stealthily move inside the castle, disabling guards and opening the gate, allowing the Duke's army to storm the castle. While the army fights outside, Snow White climbs to the top of the castle tower to confront Ravenna, but she is quickly overpowered by the sorceress. William, the huntsman, and the Duke's soldiers arrive shortly after. Ravenna turns the ceiling of the hall into shards of black glass. The soldiers use their shields for protection, but the shards transform into dark creatures. As the soldiers are preoccupied with this, Snow White fights the queen, who once again dominates her. Ravenna is about to kill Snow White and consume her heart, but Snow White uses a move the huntsman taught her earlier. She stabs the sorceress in the heart, causing Ravenna to wither and die. Hammond's army emerges victorious. Snow White is crowned queen, and the kingdom is restored. During her coronation, Snow White looks at Eric and their eyes meet. Many knowing glances are exchanged between her and the huntsman, and that's how the movie ends. Hey, subscribe to the channel if you want me to cover the sequel to this movie. A little spoiler, Ravenna isn't completely gone. And don't forget to comment your rating for the movie from 0 to 10. That's it. See you in the next recap.